I'm here to talk a little bit about, I want to say, to make the case against patriarchy. Right? And when I say patriarchy, I mean sexually exclusive, male dominated, right? This so-called, far right culture or this, alt right, right wing culture. And, it has its, pros and cons, whatever. However, there's one little part that I see so many people fuck up, especially so many guys. You see all these like, these red pill guys, black pill guys, these, incel guys, and they'll sort of advocate for these, very, very, I guess what you would call right wing, this right wing neo-Nazi kind of culture, not realizing that they're like literally the biggest fucking simps out there. I see so many dudes do this, right? They'll be total incels, they'll be these, asshole red pill guys, whatever, alpha male mindset. And they'll be like, super for the bros. But as soon as they find a woman and they fall in love with her, there's a switch. All of a sudden, it's no longer about, looking out for the bros or not falling in love with women and all that. Don't fall in love, don't date her, don't have a girlfriend, this and that. Now they all of a sudden shift to this blue pill mentality. And the ultimate red pill, the ultimate blue pill, actually, I say, the ultimate blue pill is patriarchy. Now, I'm not here to talk about race, but I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, they are white guys and or whitewashed Asians. 9 times out of 10. There are some whitewashed black dudes. There are some whitewashed Hispanic dudes. Although Hispanics, typically have a lot more European influence. But these white guys and these whitewashed dudes, they're the ones, they're like the biggest fucking simps. And on top of that, right, these patriarchal societies that had this exclusive polygyny meaning that only, 10-20% of guys get all the women. And the rest of the guys, these incels, would be, ostracized, shunned, they would be kind of shamed into submission. They would either be, psychologically, politically, socioeconomically, and, unfortunately back then, they were quite literally physically castrated. And funny enough, the most ironic part is that that's really bad for a country, and that's really bad for a country's military. Because what happens? Right? I served in the U.S. Army, albeit for a very short time. I got out, and I worked for private contractors. And so, when I did that, I noticed something, right? That the Blue Falcon culture, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, was simping. That was it, right? And you see this in history, where Attila and Genghis Khan and all these great, Mongol Khans, these Turkic Khans, these Khans, all these big name guys, Attila, Bata, Genghis, all the way up until that guy, Genghis Khan, right? They were not simping at all. They would oftentimes actually go into these European communities, right? They would go into these European communities, these white communities, these Middle Eastern communities, and they would recruit men, right? They would recruit from these marginalized groups, right? These men that were ostracized, they were hated, they were shunned, shamed, constantly made fun of, kind of like this shit that you see in prison happening to, quote unquote sex offenders. Even if it's not true or anything, they still do it. They still fucking beat the shit out of them or whatever. You wanna know what the biggest and most important thing is, you want to know how they managed to secure their empires and everything? They recruited these men and they offered them incentives. They offered them the incentives to go into these European cities, right, burn it down, and then take the women. And while they were there, they would oftentimes recruit these disenfranchised men. That's why a lot of these, Mongol and Turkic societies, you know, they were essentially, these, they would make the perfect recruits. And that's why a lot of these, these sort of tribal warlord societies in Central Asia at the time, in Eastern Europe, they were actually mixed, right? They had a lot of white people, a lot of Asians, sometimes even Middle Eastern people, Persians, whatever. And that's because they recruited from these marginalized communities. And these marginalized, disenfranchised incel men, they would join. And then all of a sudden they get to take over the city, have all these women for themselves. And it was a good system. But you know what started happening? You know what started happening, right? They started to adopt this decadence. With the decadence came the exclusiveness, the simping, the mate guarding, the being overly protective of their women. And what happened is that they fell apart. They began to fall apart. They lost their power because they kept sucking at what they do. See, the Europeans at the time actually had it right. They had these European societies, they practiced monogamy. And they would usually, go into these foreign countries and they would recruit people that were like-minded. And they would, they would kind of do the same thing. And what happened to the European societies? They too began to fall apart. That's how it all happened. These societies constantly kept falling apart. And that's why, the English Empire, they would actually recruit, they would take in these recruits from Prussia, from, the Hungarian Empire, from the Ottomans, right? And you hear about, how the Nazis, they would actually go into the Soviet Union and they would essentially recruit, men from these Turkish communities, these Turkic Mongol communities. They would recruit men from these Cossack communities, these Prussians, right? Men that were based, that were not fucking simping at all. And they brought them in, and they were crushing shit. Time and time and again. So, it's just so funny how a lot of these incel dudes, they'll be so 100% for all this, this right-wing Nazi culture, this right-wing patriarchal culture, not realizing that these cultures and that these patriarchal men are literally fucking them over. And that's, it's because a lot of these guys, they're not real incels. I mean, yeah, they're incels. And you can call them red pill, but they're not based. Right? They're fucking simps. They're biggest fucking simps ever. And they're simps because they're jealous. Alright? They're greedy. That's one of the things about decadence that, the Huns, the Khans, these Beys, Khans, these Göktürks and whatever, they warned about the decadence that these men, that, you would be falling into. And part of the decadence was jealousy and, wanting to protect and control your women. Not realizing that this jealousy and this need to protect them is essentially, right, these empires, their militaries began to turn on them because they turned into blue falcons. That's what they did. They turned into the biggest fucking blue falcons ever. screwing over each other men, screwing over their battle buddies, their comrades, wingmen, fellow, comrades, Marines, whatever you want to call them, brothers, kins. They were screwing them over because they were getting jealous. They wanted to have all that pussy for themselves. They gave in to decadence, and they started fucking simping. Decadence is not owning shit. Decadence is a state of mind, right? You know, decadence is where is where you lose your sense of judgment. You become overwhelmed with all this luxury. They fall in love with these beautiful women, or they kind of, fall into these neat little societies. And what they do is this, right? Start getting jealous, start simping, and they start fucking over each other. Then shit falls apart. That's the decadence. They become addicted to these beautiful women, and now they become jealous, and they become emotional. That's all that. Because you can take care of yourself. You can take care of yourself. You can improve your life. You could, obviously have good sleep, eat good food, take care of yourself. Not so you can just relax and lounge around. No, you do that so you can help others. So you can be on your purpose and keep moving on your purpose. But they don't do it. They don't do that shit anymore. No, these people are becoming fucking retarded. 100%. That's it. I'm not here to take sides. I'm just here to kind of spill the beans, tell the truth. And whether you like it or not, it is what it is. That's it, guys.